Hello, everyone. I want to give you a little treat, I guess, and talk you through the presentation that I gave to the King and the Queen of the Netherlands in late October, early November. And this was a very, very interesting, for me, transformational experience to meet the royalty and some of the senior policymakers in the country and talk about some of the issues of the future of work. So bear with me, and I think you'll learn some things. The first thing we talked about was the fact that the labor market itself has completely changed. And during the last month, ending the last year and coming into 2023, we're seeing this even more. The automation and AI and robots and machines and technology and computers that we've implemented during the pandemic have radically changed the nature of every single job, including hourly jobs. By the way, in the Netherlands, more than 50% of the workforce works in tourism and hospitality. So they work for very small companies. So there's a lot of hourly workers, a lot of contract workers, and most people work in very, very small companies of very few people. So it's not exactly like a giant economy with lots of big organizations, although they have some very, very big successful companies too. And that has created a labor market, which is actually very competitive and will continue to be competitive in the coming year. Despite the fact that the economy is slowing, despite the fact that we may have a recession, I am firmly convinced it will be hard to hire, regardless of what happens in the economic conditions, because not only are jobs and roles and technologies changing, but people have more agency and more flexibility than they've had in many years. Mobility is at an all-time high, and wages are going up because of that. So the labor market has changed. The next part of this story is the lack of people. And as you'll find out about in a few minutes, we are going to have a shortage of human beings, not just a shortage of skills. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One is the reduced birth rate. People have left the labor market in their 60s and 70s at a little bit faster rate than people had anticipated. The baby boomers are retiring. I'm obviously one of them. And young people are not having children, and they're not getting married at the rate they have in a long time. And in fact, the World Population Census shows that around the world, in virtually every economically developed country, the size of the population will peak somewhere in the mid 2020s to 2030s. So the number of people you have to hire is plateauing and going down. And it is going down in Germany, and it is going down in many of the Northern European countries. It's going down in the UK, it's going down in China, it's going down in Japan. So we as employers, of course, have to take this seriously. So let me talk about these 5 big trends: automation, skills, hybrid work, diversity, and productivity. Okay, digital transformation. Now, most of you know this, but the people at this conference probably did not know this, that a lot of things have gone well. And while we've transformed many, many jobs and roles and companies through technology, we're now in a transformational period of time where industries are starting to blend together. Automobile companies are getting into energy. Energy companies are getting into alternative forms of energy. Companies that provide telecommunications are into media. Media companies are getting into cloud services. Technology companies are getting into everything. Everybody's getting into technology. Healthcare companies are getting into technology. Retailers are getting into healthcare. And so there's this blend of industries that's creating a need for different skills in virtually every company. And that's what the Global Workforce Intelligence Project has been about. Now, what that means for companies is that the companies themselves are operating a different way. This book, which I don't think I can get it to show up here because of the way this camera works, but here's the book. This is my book, really describes this in great detail. And what we've basically been witnessing is the reformulation of organizations as networks, as project teams, as professional services organizations, where people don't work in hierarchical roles with bosses the way they did before. There are still plenty of jobs like that, but the automation has created a significant improvement in the types of work that people do. There's research that I just read over the weekend that you'll read about in our predictions report that shows that something like 87% of the GDP in the United States is driven through service-related jobs, not service industry jobs, service-related jobs, jobs that are human service value-add jobs. The number of mechanical, rote, routine jobs is going down faster and faster and faster. Now, you may not believe me because many people may believe that automation is bad. And one of the things that came up in the Netherlands was one of the public sector leaders said, well, if we have self-driving trucks and self-driving cars, what's going to happen to all the bus drivers? And I sort of had to smile. And I said, well, they'll find other jobs. There's better jobs than driving a bus. In fact, most bus drivers are pretty good at dealing with human beings. They could probably work in customer service. Maybe some of them want to work in sales. They'll be given other opportunities. And the proof to that is this data. I went through and looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and some of the Federal Reserve data, and I went back around 30 years, and I looked at the rate of inflation versus the rate of hourly wage growth. And what you can see is that actually, with all of this automation that's been going on, whether you believe the political left or the political right, the average wage relative to inflation has gone up significantly, 31%. The reason for that is automation has made jobs better. And I am very, very convinced for all of us, regardless of the job we're in. By the way, my role is also threatened by GPT-3. If GPT-3, the AI-enabled language system, is really good, you may not need me anymore. So I'm dealing with it too. We all have these technologies that feel threatening, but if we use them well and we build services around them, we end up with better and better jobs. So that's item number one. Number two, skills in education. There is no question, and most of you know this, that education is the number one driver of wealth and income and satisfaction in your career. Undereducated people don't know what they don't know, and employers are no longer willing to wait for the public sector to catch up. You know this. The educational institutions that I know, most of them are really threatened by the lower birth rate, except for the very high-end ones. Many of their graduates are not finding the jobs they thought they were going to get, and they're starting to become more pragmatic institutions. There's a lot of reasons why they don't change. I think there's a lot of institutional bias and a lot of old-fashioned thinking in the university system, and they're motivated primarily by tuition fees, not by outcomes. So organizations are basically saying, I'm not going to wait for this. I'm going to do it myself. And they're building what we call capability academies. And so I explained to the audience what's been going on in the business sector. Of course, in addition to that is the fact that they're not just training people on technical skills, they're training people on human skills, on design skills, on professional skills, on industry skills. And I don't need to explain this to most of you, but the skills of the future are not software engineering. Software engineering is a great career. It's about 6.5% of the workforce. 93.5% of the people who are out there making a living don't develop software. They use it or they do something else. And as you can see at the CEO levels from IBM, that CEOs are not as interested in technical skills as you might think. They know they're important, but they want other things. Now, the third thing relative to education is this groundbreaking new idea called a career pathway. And we've formally defined this as a different model from a career path. A career pathway is a program or a solution developed by a company in partnership with educational institutions to move people from low-wage, low-skilled jobs to high-wage, high-value jobs. Sometimes it requires education. Sometimes it requires a college degree. Sometimes it requires a professional degree. Sometimes it requires remedial work. And organizations like Guild Education and EdAssist from Bright Horizons do this for companies. And I think this is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you read our research on healthcare, you'll see that this is one of the biggest innovations in the healthcare industry, is moving people into these new roles. So that is part of the future of work. Number three, hybrid work. I am very, very convinced that hybrid work is here to stay. This is not a passing fad. We have made the shift away from working at home or in the office all the time to some form of work at home, and companies are going to have to live with this. You will not get everybody to come back into the office. Roughly 40 to 45% of office space is empty. It may never be filled, or it may be filled in satellite offices or part-time filled. The nature of the workplace is going to be much, much different. And most big companies, when you get under the covers and you get into the data of what they're really doing, have a massive number of contingent and contract workers, much, much more than they realized. And those of us that have been contract workers or contingent workers or entrepreneurs are doing quite well. If you look at the red bubble, very high percentage of the freelancers who go out and do their own thing make more money than they did when they were working full time, and then they have the flexibility to boot. So this is sort of a big, big topic for the future of work. And of course, underneath it is this existential change in what a career looks like. When I got out of college in 78, your company was your career, and your company took care of you, and you hoped that you picked the right company because that company was going to define your growth. We then moved to a world in the 1980s and 90s where people jumped around from job to job, and your career became a series of stair steps or lattice steps, or whatever you want to call it, between companies as you get different jobs and different roles to move yourself up into the areas that you want to do and the roles and the career jobs that you want to fulfill. Today, it's moving to a skills-based model for careers, where not only will you be promoted or hired because of your skills, but you might be able to sell your skills on the side. And there was research done by Deloitte right when I left that almost 60% of Gen Z workers at the time were doing side hustles. So this is a very significant change. And as most of you know, the skills-centric world changes recruiting, performance management, internal mobility, development, all sorts of things. So all of that is another positive step in the future of work. And by the way, it also impacts the way real estate is set up. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I've done some research on the real estate industry. Talk about an industry that's under disruption. Most real estate leases are about 2 or 3 years in length. And so coming out of the pandemic over the next year or two, there's going to be a lot of redesign of where we work and how the offices are set up and the technologies we use to find and locate and take advantage of workspace. Small cities have become major employers. And really, this is very, very good because a lot of the income inequality that we've had, at least in the United States, was because if you weren't in a big city, you could not find a good job. And that's going to go away. Number 4. Now, I made a special point in the Netherlands to talk about diversity for 2 reasons. One is, with the lower birth rate and the scarcity of workers, we are going to have to be more diverse by design. We really have no choice. Old people, young people, women, men, different nationalities, different cognitive styles, different races, different genders. You know, there are many different genders. We have to become more open-minded to this. And the Netherlands was very cognizant of this. I actually talked to the king about it. They're very honest about the fact that they have issues in this area. I don't need to tell you that it's important. The statistics are all over the place. More women than men graduate from college. In the United States, more than 2/3 of the workforce are not white. In the gig workforce, we know from study after study that diverse companies outperform their peers, diverse boards outperform their peers, diverse teams outperform their peers. They find it easier to hire. They have a more inclusive culture. They have a better sense of belonging, and they better understand their customers because there aren't very many companies left that don't have diverse customer bases as well. However, this is a completely unsolved problem. The institutionalized bias and the institutionalized history of white male business people in most places remains, and it remains all over the world. And I won't go through all these numbers. You can look at them here. But this is a problem that is not solved. And what we found in the research we've done in elevating equity is the only way it does get solved is not by hiring a head of DEI and throwing it into the HR department, but it's when the company, the CEO, the management team, the leadership team realizes that diversity is a business strategy. It is part of being a better company, serving customers and having more diverse suppliers, doing business in more diverse countries, being able to interoperate with partners of different shapes and sizes, and meeting the needs of a highly diverse set of customers and buyers. And once you come to that conclusion, diversity just happens. It doesn't have to be driven and owned by HR. So we talked a lot about that, and the fact that many leaders are still not fully on board with this. They don't understand it. They've delegated it to HR and they're not taking a good action on it. So this will be an ongoing topic. And I think the folks, we had a big debate about it there with some educational institutions as well. The final discussion we had was about well-being and productivity. And to me, as many of you have heard, and you'll read a lot about this in the predictions report, well-being and productivity are matched. Well-being does not create productivity. Productivity creates well-being. In other words, when we create a work experience and a work environment and a set of environmental and cultural norms that create productivity, including maybe the 4-day work week, by the way, which we're starting to study in great detail, people feel healthier. They feel better. They feel more relaxed. They have more agency. They feel more clear about what they're responsible for. It isn't the other way around. We're not giving people pep pills or making them sleep in the office or calling them all weekend to try to get them to do more work because we want more productivity. And let's leave Elon Musk out of this. That is not a sustainable strategy. It might work for a short period of time, but it won't work for a long period of time. And this is now a CEO level issue. And I won't take you through the data because many of you have seen this, but this data came out late last year, and I'm sure it's still true. The level of stress in the workforce is at an all-time high. Let me give you something to think about here. By the way, I was thinking about the 4-day work week. If you go back to the late 1700s and the early 1800s, most people worked 7 days a week. They worked 12, 14 hours a day. They worked a lot of hours. And as we automated factories and developed robots and built computers and PCs and telecommunications and so forth, people started to work fewer hours. But the stress level remained very high because we didn't change the philosophies of management around the use of these more automated tools, because of course what happened was the jobs became more human and service and design oriented, but we treated them like production workers as if they were producing widgets. And I think for Elon Musk to be reading people's lines of code and measuring people on how many lines of code they've created and so forth is a perfect example of that. That has led us to where we are, and we need a new paradigm. And the new paradigm is for CEOs and business leaders to understand that one of the most important roles they have working with us in HR is to design jobs and an organization and a set of practices, including performance management, that facilitate productivity, that create performance, that give people energy, that allow people to move to roles that are best for them, as opposed to being forced into a role that they don't want to do because they want to get promoted, because they can't get a raise if they don't get promoted. Many, many, many things I wrote about in my book are artifacts of another era that doesn't exist anymore. And so well-being is a great example of a CEO level issue that has now reached the mainstream and is much, much more than benefits. The final thing as I concluded the speech is something very, very simple. And I would say this was very well understood from the folks we met with in the Netherlands, is that people are now the number one challenge in business. Yes, we need great technology. Yes, we need a great brand. Yes, we need great advertising. Yes, we need great marketing. We need a great sales force. But ultimately, business is entirely a job of managing people. And so one way to think about this is that the world of work in the future of work, is about designing our organizations, our businesses, our companies around people and in context with people. In all the work we've done in org design, for example, of all the things we found, perhaps the most profound of all is that companies that know how to build great organizations and high-performing teams listen to the people doing the work. They don't sit around in the boardroom or in some HR working session and design things and then roll them out with change management to get people to do them. They design and develop better and better work practices from the people, with the people, and for the people. And that's really, in some sense, what my book has been all about for many years. So that's the speech. It was a relatively small speech. It took me about 20 minutes, but I'll tell you, the dialogue afterwards was just priceless. We had heads of universities, we had social policy leaders, we had entrepreneurs, we had the king and the queen, both heavily engaged in the conversation. And even though the Netherlands is a pretty well-run place and a pretty cool country, they've got plenty of issues they want to deal with, and they're taking them head on. And so I would encourage you to enter 2023 and you deal with all of the things we're going to be having to deal with on the economy and the high interest rates and inflation. Think about this issue of how existentially new and different the work environment has become. And these 5 things, the issue of automation, the issue of skills and education, the issue of hybrid work, the issue of truly building diversity and inclusion, and the issue of really creating a CEO level mandate for well-being and productivity. Those are the center of building a great organization and having a great year in 2023. So thank you for taking a little bit of time to listen to this, and please reach out to us if you'd like to talk more about any of these topics. Thank you.